It's time to get back to work on the 1985 4Runner, and this week I'm going to show how to cut out these rusty, paper-thin rocker panels, clean and prep the area behind the rocker panels, and weld in new metal. And I'm dealing with Ohio rust here, so it extends from the front corner where the bottom of the fender bolts to, all the way back and up into the door jamb. When you're doing this kind of repair, it's always worse than it looks on the surface. Watch out, kitty. So the best thing to do is get your favorite hammer and go ahead and smash that rocker panel. So I was able to punch a hole pretty much anywhere throughout this entire rocker panel under the door area. This whole thing needs replaced. In addition to that, we also have a lot of rot going up here in the corner of the door jamb, and that's going to be a little bit more work to recreate. Now listen to this. If you can hear that difference on video, this is the sound of solid metal. Now I already replaced this section back here because I had to do this and repair the completely rotted out area behind it in order to properly repair this rear quarter panel, which I did all that in a previous video. I'll put a link down below. And listen to this. This section of metal right here sounds as solid as the new section that I've already welded in. So I may be able to leave this, which would be nice. Here I have an aftermarket rocker panel. This is what you get from Wolf Steel. And as we found out back here, it's not an exact fit. In fact, it's not even really that close at all. Unless you're using this entire panel to repair from down here all the way up to this pinch weld here, you're almost better off just saving the money and just picking up some pieces of flat sheet metal and bending them yourself. Because for whatever reason, the way these rot out, the rust usually stops right about at this curve. We'll find out for sure though, once I cut this out. I'm using a 4-inch cutting wheel for this long cut. And no, I didn't consider the fact that flying hot metal sparks would embed themselves into my iPhone. Lesson learned. You saw that I swapped over to a regular grinding wheel, and that was so I could hit this bottom edge and remove all the paint from the high areas. And what I'm left with every 4 or 5 inches here is a low area where paint is still on the surface. And every one of those low areas is where I have a spot weld holding this panel to the one behind it. Now I get to drill out every one of those using this spot weld drill bit. Don't attempt this with a regular drill bit. I'll do this one here in real time just to show you how long this process takes with all of these, and then I'll do the rest in time lapse. First, get yourself a little bit of oil and go ahead and dip the bit in there. Using some oil will greatly extend the life of the bit. I'll put a link to these spot weld drill bits down in the description, as well as all of the other tools I'll be using throughout this video. Whoops. And that's what happens when you go too far. Ideally, I would have stopped drilling once I got through this first panel, but I missed the mark there and went through the second panel as well. Moving on down. And that's exactly what I want, is to have the outer sheet metal separate from the one behind it. Since I was going to be here for a while, I raised the rocker up a little so I'm not hunched over so much. I marked each spot weld with the punch and let the drill do the work. Then use the chisel to break apart any metal still attached around the spot welds. Now I have all the spot welds busted out and this rocker panel's about ready to come off, except for the very ends where I couldn't reach with the big blade. So I used a Dremel to cut into those tight corners. And here's the most rewarding part, is bending this back and forth and hearing each last one of those spot welds break free as you go along. There'll be a loud pop sound. And then there was one. So I have a little bit of the outer panel left behind. A little bit of that stayed with the spot weld. And down on to this end, when I was chiseling, I actually took out some of the back panel with the spot weld. Those are easy, you just grind them down. And down here, I'll have to straighten out this metal, weld this back shut, and then grind it down smooth. And as far as the overall condition of this inner panel here, it's not terrible, but it could be better. Oh, and when I say not terrible, I mean not terrible for Ohio. So that's all still pretty solid. I'm happy with that. Now let's check up under here on the inside edge of this curve. And you can see I've got some pretty heavy surface rust going on that edge there. As well as right here, you can see a hole. Fabricating that isn't going to be a huge deal because that's hidden by the fender, so it doesn't have to look exactly the shape that it did from the factory. However, this big mess down here is very visible, and I'm gonna need to cut this all out. And this is the thinner outer panel, which extends on back to the quarter panel. You can see the difference right here. This one actually overlays this thicker inner panel. However, I have rust in between these two panels, and to properly fix this and keep it from returning, I'm gonna have to cut off this outer skin and see what kind of condition this inner metal is in. Here's the area that I'm going to cut out. I'm using masking tape over the area so that I can remove the tape and save it to use as a template later. The welding blanket will protect what's left of the interior from any flying sparks. I started with a cutoff wheel and switched to a Dremel for the tighter cuts. There were a couple of sneaky spot welds hiding behind this section. Looking on the inside of this section, it was definitely rusty, but surprisingly solid. I started by cleaning up what was left of the spot welds. And cleaning up the edge I cut out. And here's what I'm left with. Now that I have this bottom edge of this inner lip clean, I got to get this recessed area, and for that, I'm going to use a needle scaler. As you can see by the amount that this section is flexing when I'm pressing the needle scaler against it, it's paper thin thanks to rust. But the needle scaler confirmed that all the metal in this area was definitely solid. So I'm pretty happy with this. That's mostly solid. However, down here, not so solid. Now this front fender was used as an experiment in a previous video to see if these arches from the 4x4 front fenders could be used to repair the arches for the rear fenders. So this fender is cut up and gone. I'm gonna need a fender to line up here and make sure to get these two mounting holes down here in the exact same spot. So I went back to the wall of fenders and I got myself this from my old red 1987 four-wheel drive. Now with this in place, I'll have some sort of a loose guide as to where those mounting holes should be. So when I cut this area all out, I'll be able to get it back in the right position. I drew an outline of the area which was paper thin and drilled out some more spot welds. This reamer has a nice pointy tip for locating paper-thin sheet metal. I used a wire wheel on a drill to remove the remaining surface rust on the inside of the rocker panel. I've also got some rust up here on this inside edge as well. Now for these areas that I can't reach, there's a couple options there. You could use a sandblaster, which I don't have, or you could use a rust converter, which is a chemical. And I used to use that until I got the laser cleaner. So I'm gonna go with option number 3 here. I already learned in the previous video that plastics do not take kindly to lasers. Now that I have the inside of this rocker panel all cleaned up, I want to throw some primer over this so it doesn't flash rust. Just because here in the wintertime, we get a lot of water, a lot of humidity here in this garage. So I have some self-etching primer here that I'm going to throw on there, and I'm running the Beaver diesel heater to try and heat up the metal a little bit to get that to bond and cure a little bit better. And you can see it's kind of working. It's up to about 60 degrees. I took a minute to straighten up this edge before applying the primer. So it's been about 24 hours and the primer here inside this rocker panel cavity area is all cured and dried. And what I'd like to do first is reassemble and reconstruct this area because it's going to be the most challenging, and I may need to get in behind here to, move things around and bend things out. I'm starting off with another masking tape template. This is my favorite simple way to trace the shape of a repair area onto a piece of new sheet metal. And here's what I ended up with. I added some guidelines to let me know exactly where I needed to bend the edges. They make fancy tools for shaping metal, and I'm sure I'd get a smoother final result in a lot less time than the way I'm doing it here. But the truth is that I've never needed anything more than this old bench vise, an old anvil, some scrap steel, and body hammers to fabricate any body panel pieces when it comes to repairing rust. I'm by no means a professional fabricator, but I'm surprised at what I can shape with basic tools. So just because you don't have a bead roller or an English wheel or a sheet metal brake doesn't mean that you can't fabricate custom pieces yourself. As we'll see, this one was a bit of a challenge for me with all of the compound angles and curves. Another test fit, and I was able to see that I needed to modify the left side. And it was getting closer, but still needed a lot more work. So I've got this sort of clamped in place where it's going to belong, and you can see I've got some extra fat on here still to trim down, which was intentional. I'd rather have too much metal than not enough. So my next step is going to be sort of cutting off the excess that I don't need.
Here's how it looks after a little massage from the body hammer. Now the bottom of the fender was able to butt up to the edge of the rocker panel. And I could see that the mounting holes on the fender sat a bit lower than the mounting holes on my repair panel. So I used a propane torch to soften the metal so it would only bend in the small area I was working with then.
Time for a test fit. And now we're getting somewhere. You can see the holes in the fender are flush with the repair panel. And now I can carefully start removing some of this excess material around the outside.
As I'm transitioning from general to specific details on the shape of this piece, I made some positioning marks to ensure I have it in the exact same position every time I place it on the body to see what I need to trim down next. And after I thought it looked pretty good, I installed the door and fender for a final check. And found that it needed a little more trimming.
All right, I'm pretty happy with the way this is fitting on my repair area here. And I'm gonna set this aside. I bolted the door on and test fit 2 different sets of fenders, and neither one really fit right with the door. This one here is 2-wheel drive. It had a weird gap. This one's 4-wheel drive, aftermarket, but as we saw before, it's kind of rusty where it mounts down here. So I ordered another pair of aftermarket fenders, and those are gonna be the ones that I'm gonna use to fit this with and align my mounting holes. So until those fenders arrive, I'm gonna take this door back off and we'll start on this repair piece.
The first thing I needed to do was make some relief cuts on the top corners so that I could place the panel on the lower edge of the door jamb without hitting the curves on both ends.
So now I can set this on here and have it be flush. Now over here on the passenger side, I've already repaired this whole thing from front to back, and here is about where I'm repairing on the driver's side. I got a cut here and it's gonna go all the way across. This is all missing too, and I'm gonna have to refabricate this separately because it actually comes out and goes over top of this whole intersection here. You can see it kind of goes in there behind it. And right here is that original piece, so you can see this will end up butting up flush with this here, and this then will fold up over the top and cover up all this. So that's gonna be one other section separate from this repair down here, which this will be used for. So this will actually only be coming out to right there. And it's still gonna be about a 1/2 inch short. And here's a closer look at the difference of this bottom angle here. You can see not only is it more rounded, but it doesn't actually extend out far enough. So I need to take this whole thing, put it over my bench vise, but it's not gonna fit with all this extra fat here on top. So the first thing I need to do is cut this down across here. This radius is totally different, but I'm not gonna need most of it. So I'm gonna draw a line, and I'll use the plasma cutter to cut this down, and then I can fit this in my vise and fix this lower angle. Well, you know, I already got the X1 Pro from X1 Laser Lab set up over here. It's a welding, cutting, and cleaning 3-in-1 machine, and we'll go ahead and use this to cut this piece of metal. I've got a guide set up here.
With the height trimmed down, my next step was to adjust the lower angle of the repair piece. And honestly, this inaccuracy in the repair panel is something that 99% of people wouldn't even notice. I'm not a perfectionist, but now is the one and only time I have to make this fit better, so I might as well show how to fix this piece with basic tools. I'm using pieces of scrap angle iron to extend the width of my bench vice's jaws, and heating the repair panel where I want to bend it into a slightly sharper angle. You can actually see the metal warping as it heats up and then cools down. Time for a contour check. And I still had some work to do. And after that second round of adjustment, the contour was perfect.
So now that I have this bottom section all lined up and that matches, I can take a look at the top here and see that I have some extra to cut off. And actually a little bit less as I move on down.
Now I needed to trim a little off this lower edge. Since I shaved the top edge of the repair panel, I needed to add a slight curve to make it meet up with the OEM body line. Using heat softens the area I want to bend so that the main area of the panel stays straight. And then a little more trimming. And I still had some high spots, so I marked those with the Sharpie. I'm repeating the process, removing a little bit of material at a time, so I don't end up with any large gaps. I'm using the bench vise to add a small radius at the top edge. I had a little bit of cleaning up to do on this edge. At this point, the edges are so close to a perfect match that I don't even want to use a power tool and risk messing up all this progress. So a file is perfect for the very fine adjustments.
All right, I've got this so close to fitting and being flush, I have to remove a tiny bit of material. I'm talking like a millimeter right here in the middle, just to get it to line up. So I'm not even gonna touch the grinder now. I'm just gonna do it with the file. And look at that. I'll have to clamp this down when I weld it, but it is perfectly flush. I couldn't be happier with this piece. And with this piece and that first piece done there, I have one more piece to create, and that's this one right here. And if you recall earlier, I made this tape template to show exactly the piece that I cut out. So let's take my tape template and go put this on a piece of sheet metal. So I've got this pretty much trimmed down. I'm really happy with how it's gonna fit here, but there's one thing I have to do. If you look right here, you can see there's a little bump out, and this is where that rubber stopper on the door hits. And I'm gonna have to go over and hammer a little bulge here on my trim piece to sort of match that.
All I'm doing here is hitting this area repeatedly with the ball peen hammer to stretch the metal.
So here's what I ended up with, and test fit, not perfect. I've actually got a gap. I don't think I had this cut correctly to begin with, or I just bent it so much that it kind of spread out because it stretched so much metal here, because this is now hanging over too. I don't know, I'm at that point where I almost want to start over, but I'll mess with this a little bit more and see if I can get it to fit better. I am gonna need to stretch this right here. You can see on that marker line, because this sort of used to go in and curve out. So over here on the passenger side that I've already repaired, you can see kind of what I'm talking about, where it kind of goes in and curves out. And let's see where I am on this. Pretty much good until right here. The circle is too big, it comes out too far. So I need to sort of end this right about here and then have a smooth transition that comes out more through here. And over here, I'm gonna need to sort of flatten this out a little bit too. Stretch this a little bit more right here to sort of come in and come out and meet up with this. So we're gonna stretch this right here. And that's gonna be a pretty big change, so I'm gonna wait and do this before I worry about this bit up here. Still not there. I'm struggling on this one here. Right here's the main problem. You know, I'm just gonna bend this out a little bit by hand. Let's just try this real quick before I give up on this piece and start over. Throw a Hail Mary here. All right, that helps a little bit. Let's keep going. I can take a little bit off of this curve here to move this up a tiny bit to help fill that gap. So I'm gonna mark that first. You can see I actually have a gap right here in the middle. So we're gonna take some material off of this bottom edge up to right about there. And then I'll take a tiny bit off of this part here. And we'll also take a tiny bit off of there to there.
And now, with it fitting better from trimming those areas, it was time to focus on this edge.
Here we go. This is about as good as I'm gonna get it. I do have a little bit of gap to fill in, mostly right there, but this edge lines up well. This is unfortunate, but I can live with that. Now I do need to trim this piece because as you can see, it's really gotten to be sort of turned to the left in this whole shaping process. And this line right here is where I need to create this piece to come over to. So you can see I've got to trim this edge off right here and some of this off right here to get that square. And over here on the passenger side, you can see this piece just sort of comes out and cuts down at a 90 and then wraps down. So I'm going to remove this area next. Now the last piece to this is adding this radius right here. And I need to start this radius a little bit higher. Before I fabricate this little strip down here, I'm actually gonna weld this in just so it's not shifting around on me as I'm working and throwing off my next piece. In fact, I go ahead and start welding in all these new panels, except for this front corner here because my new aftermarket fender has arrived and it's not even close to lining up. I'm gonna need to do some pretty major modification to get this to fit. Before I start on this, I want to take a minute to thank the sponsor for today's video, my wallet. While I was waiting for all my bones to heal from that bad accident, I designed a bunch of different Toyota stickers. And if you're a subscriber and you like the video, comment down below and I'll select one of those comments at random and send you a sticker of your choice. I'll also put a link in the description to my store where I sell these stickers as well as a bunch of different Toyota shirts. I greatly appreciate you supporting the channel. Now, let's fix this repair panel.
I'm using the propane torch on the specific area I want to modify here, where the fender will bolt to, since the rest of the piece is fitting great. I'm pretty much just undoing some of the metal stretching I did in this area previously. But as you see, changing the contour of this small area did affect the overall shape of the rest of the piece. And now I needed to fix that. Using those old fenders as a guide seemed like a good idea at the time, but it would have saved me some labor if I waited until I had the actual fenders I was going to use on the 4Runner before shaping this piece. Lesson learned. Now that I've modified the piece to clear the mounting points for the new fenders, it's time to drill holes for the mounting bolts.
Weld the nut on the back.
While I have the drill out, I need to make the holes for the plug welds.
And with all these pieces ready to weld in, I need to do a little bit of prep work. You can see I have a couple holes where I got a little too crazy with the chisel, chiseling out my spot welds. I need to fill those in. A couple where I went all the way through with the drill bit. And I also need to remove all the paint from all these areas right here that I have marked, because those are going to be where I do a plug weld because I don't own a spot welder. And now is also the ideal time to go through with a wire wheel on the drill and clean off all the paint from the edges that I'm going to be welding to on the outside as well as on the inside. Because remember, I sprayed primer and this whole cavity to prevent it from flash rusting. I've got some weld through primer here. And a little bit on that bare metal as well. All right, it's had plenty of time to dry. Let's get it clamped in place. And once I have it positioned exactly where I want it, I can see that everything is gonna line up. I'll be doing plug welds in place of spot welds. Everywhere I drilled a hole, I'm just gonna weld that in and connect the two pieces together. There is one additional step. I'm gonna need something small and sharp to go into each one of these holes and scratch off the weld-through primer that I already applied. And I'm doing this so that when I start the MIG weld, there is a good surface to arc to on both pieces. Otherwise, I'm only gonna have a good connection on this outer panel and not the one behind it. I'm checking the fitment of this fender one last time, and we are good.
And with the front piece all welded in, I moved on to the door jamb next. And then cleaned up the welds with a grinder. Now I'm marking on my repair panel every place where I'll need to drill a hole for a plug weld.
For drilling all these holes in this rocker panel, it's gonna be a lot faster if I use the drill press.
I still needed to fill in these holes before welding on the new outer panel. I used compressed air to blow out of the inner panel any metal dust left from grinding.
It's a little cold out here today, so I'm gonna heat this area with the heat gun before I spray it with the weld-proof primer. So what I'm doing here is getting 2 vice grips and putting one on each side of my plug weld, because watch, it'll actually pull in a little bit closer to the panel behind it, and that's what I want. I don't want a gap between the two. So here we go. You can see it pulled in maybe a millimeter or 2 at most, but I do want these to be perfectly flush.
With the seam and plug welds completely welded, it was now time to grind them down smooth.
Now I'm ready to smooth these down a little more with the mini belt sander. So it's probably hard to tell this on camera because it's very small variance, but this isn't perfectly flat. There are some waves that kind of come in and out a little bit. Maybe you can see one right there, a little one right there. So I have a light on the floor facing up. And now I'm gonna file this, and if I look through the edge of the file here, I can see where I have high points and low points. So I need to bring down these high points like this one right here. So now that I have this entire panel all welded in and finished, I have a small gap up here where this piece needs to meet with the other new piece I created. And here's what I'm looking at. Now, this is mostly covered up by the fender, and you can see I left this original curved edge here sort of just as a reference because I might need it later on, and it actually was so thin that it ended up breaking. So now that I kind of know where that's going to go based on the new piece that I have installed here to the left of it, I'm going to pull out this old paper thin piece that's already broken and make a new patch to go from here to there.
Because of the bulging curve, this piece required a lot of metal stretching. And I had a long way to go. On a piece like this, I find it's best to start with the general shape before getting into the smaller specific details. I was heading in the right direction, but still needed to bend and stretch the metal a lot more.
This angle at the bottom is a pretty important part of this shape, so let's focus on that for a bit.
Now it was starting to match the shape of the original, and look at how much shaping the bottom edge changed the top fitment. I left plenty of extra material on the edge this time for that exact reason.
All right, so my new piece is getting pretty close to final shape. I'm kind of following that body line there. Now it's definitely not accurate yet because I have a big overlap on this side, you see, so it's not able to sort of sit up flush as if it were in that groove. So my next step is I've drawn a line here, and I'm gonna use that to make a template, to make a cut right here, and that's gonna get this piece sitting flush in that gap, and I'll be able to sort of size this up a little bit better. All right, looking good. Just need to weld it in.
Sorry to say the welding and grinding videos were corrupt, but here's the last step on this section.
So here's how it looks, all cleaned up. And now I have one part left to do, and it's this last simple straight piece that's gonna have a few bends in it right here. And I'm just gonna do that in time-lapse mode because I'm sure this video is getting pretty long. So that is how you repair the rusty rocker panels on a first generation 4Runner or an 84 to 88 Toyota pickup. Next on the to-do list for this 4Runner is finish taking out the interior and everything out of the engine bay and use this homemade rotisserie. Then I can finally separate the body from the frame and get to work on that. Thanks for watching.